Let me introduce Professor Doron, Issi, okay, from Haifa University's Social Welfare and Health Sciences School, Social Work, and Department of Gerontology. Issi specializes in the fields of law and aging, social policy, seniors' rights, and elder law. He's also the chair of the Law and Service of the Elderly, which is an Israeli NGO. Did I make any mistakes? Is this good enough, or should I have a whole page full?
No.
Okay. So, go ahead.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
First, I want to thank the organizer for inviting me. It's a pleasure and honor to be here today. Since actually I have a very short presentation, as unlike my previous lectures, I don't have still a paper and only an idea. So what I thought was to present the idea and basically receive some feedback and your thoughts, and that would be most appreciated. However, since I do have some time to spend and not too much to say about my paper, I wanted to use this opportunity to say 2 or 3 preliminary comments. First preliminary comment, one of the things I do is I'm the president of the Israeli Gerontological Society. I'm located at the Department of Gerontology in Israel. And in that position, I have what I would like to think a relatively broad perspective on the field of gerontology in Israel. And I would like to argue that in general, I'm very happy for this conference and workshop because, in very broad sense, the economics of aging and pensions is almost invisible today in the Israeli gerontological sphere. So I believe that this workshop is very important in the sense that we in the field of gerontology really invite or are happy or would like to see much more presence and visibility to the economic and public policy dimensions of aging, which is currently, as I said, almost invisible. The second point, preliminary point I would like to make is from another perspective that I'm holding, which is a chair of an NGO called Law in the Service of the Elderly. Similarly to the point I made regarding the place of economics in gerontology, I would like also to argue that the role of NGOs in civil society within the field of rights of older persons in general, and more specifically in the field of rights of older persons with regard to pensions and social security, is almost non-existent, in the sense that there is very little activity, which is now changing, in the field of NGOs to promote financial literacy, knowledge, advocacy, strategic case law in the field of pension in Israel right now, and there is a real gap in this field in Israel. Finally, and that will be my last preliminary point, is the sense of the importance of interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary work in this field, which we had an excellent example in the previous presentation regarding the relationship of, for example, raising retirement age and subjective well-being, which is a classic interdisciplinary work. I would like to relate this importance of interdisciplinary work to what I do. Personally, my disciplinary background is law. I'm a lawyer still. I'm a law professor. All my academic career comes from the legal background. About 2 weeks ago, the Supreme Court of Israel handed down a very important, strategic precedent regarding the rights of labor unions to strike and present and represent pensioners and retired persons. It was in a case known as the University of Bar Ilan. The interesting issue about this really important case, which deserves a whole lecture on its own, is the following. First, the history, or a short background. More than a decade ago, there was a financial labor dispute between the state, the universities, and the academic faculties. There was various issues, but one of the issues in Bar-Ilan University was the fact that after the regular faculty received a substantial raise, because of the specific pensions of the kind of pension of the Bar-Ilan University, the pensioners, the emeritus professors, did not receive the same raise in their pensions. So the existing workers decided to hold a labor strike or labor dispute in order to defend and to advocate for the rights of their pensioners. The University of Bar-Ilan went to the district court and argued that under Israeli labor law, under the collective agreement bargaining law, one cannot hold a strike for someone who's not an active employee. So, right. So the district labor court gave a decision that under its interpretation on constructive law, it held that indeed there is no legal right to strike to defend the rights of pensioners. So the faculty of Bar-Ilan appealed to the National Labor Court. The National Labor Court in Israel reversed the decision and held the decision that there is a legal right to strike to defend the rights of pensioners under Israeli law. So the university and other organizations went to the Israeli Supreme Court. And 2 weeks ago, the Israeli Supreme Court gave a decision that says that indeed under Israeli law, labor unions can hold a strike to defend people who are no longer active employees, meaning pensioners. Now this was very interesting for two reasons. One, from a comparative law perspective, similar disputes can be found in the USA and in Canada. The Supreme Court of the USA took the positions that active employees cannot strike for the rights of their pensioners. On the contrary, the Canadian Supreme Court held the decision that employees do have the right to strike for the rights of pensioners. So two totally contradictory legal decisions. From a social gerontology perspective, I would like to argue that each decision represents a social gerontological theory, which has no representation in the legal decision in itself. One theory is called the intergenerational conflict theory. This social gerontology theory says that there is an internal, inherent, and consistent conflict between generations. And according to this social theory, there is no justification to allow for working employees to strike for the rights of pensioners because internally there's and inherently there's a conflict and eventually they can actually erode and infringe the rights of their pensioners. On the other hand, there is a social solidarity theory in the field of gerontology which says that generations are interrelated, interconnected, and eventually show much solidarity. So from a social solidarity perspective, the correct legal decision is to allow for younger generations to strike and protect the rights of the older generation. The interesting point from my perspective is that none of these social gerontology theories are represented, expressed, were visible within the legal court decision making. And I think that one of the nice things about interdisciplinary work that you can expose legal theories to social gerontology theories and enrich one another within the legal process. So far my preliminary notes. Now to my presentation. I'm going to present to you a research proposal that was accepted. The research itself was not conducted yet. So I'm only going to present the idea of the rationale. As you have heard yesterday and today, we are living in turbulent days with regard to the pension systems in Israel and basically all over the developed world. one of the questions, and the interesting questions, is what role does law play in the shaping and establishing and the processing of social policy in the field of occupational pensions in Israel? Which is an interesting question by itself. More specifically, I wanted to ask, what is the role of Israel's Supreme Court of Justice within this broader question of the role of law in shaping, changing, playing an active role in shaping Israel policy regard to occupational pension? Now, naturally, this is a part of a much broader legal, socio-legal question. What is the place of Israeli Supreme Court in general in shaping the values and norms in the Israeli society in large? However, in this research, I wanted to focus specifically, or would like to focus specifically, of the role the Israeli Supreme Court played in shaping the occupational pension. So the goal of this study was basically to answer the research question as presented: what was the role, or what is the role of Israel's Supreme Court of Justice in shaping the occupational pensions policy in Israel? The methodology I'm going to use is a mixed methodology. On the one hand, it's going to be a quantitative kind of very fundamental, basic kind of quantitative research. In brackets, I would say that one of the limitations as a lawyer and as someone from a legal background, that we in the legal discipline are not taught social science methods. We believe in law that reality doesn't matter, so we simply study the law and we don't do any empirical work. So we're very disabled in this field. However, I'm going to try to do some to collect all the cases in the field, enter them into kind of a statistical computerized database, and try to, first on the descriptive perspective, see how many cases are there. To what extent the Supreme Court is approached to give decisions in the field. In what specific fields within this broad field of occupation pensions is the Supreme Court asked to give decisions? Who goes to the Supreme Court? Is it private people, pensioners? Is it the pension funds? Is it the government? Who are the players in this legal game? And finally, what are the results? To what extent are the decisions made by the Supreme Court intervene, change, or hold back and do not intervene? This is the quantitative part. The second part is a qualitative part. The qualitative part is actually to take the text of the decisions themselves and in a very similar manner to other qualitative research to try to pull out themes, ideas, discourses, what is the language that the Supreme Court uses, what are the main direction that he, in his wordings, he adopts, and try to see how we can analyze that. For the purpose of this presentation this morning, yesterday evening, again, I haven't started the study yet. I did a very simple computerized search in one of the legal known databases, which is called Nevo. I entered the word pension, and Bagatz, an Israeli Supreme Court of Justice. Overall, throughout the years, I found something like 340 cases, and then I started to divide them into years. And what was very interesting, I assumed, I hypothesized that there was going to be an increase of the number of cases that include pensions before the Supreme Court. However, I thought that I would see two peaks. One, I thought that I would find between the years 95, 99 because of the first significant reform in the year 95. And then in the year 2002, 2003, again after the second significant reform. I didn't find that, but I did find, as you can see, a really significant increase and a substantial increase in the amount of cases that came before the Israel Supreme Court after the year 2005. This, I assume, represents the significant change that you heard already regarding the privatization and the whole change of the structure of the Israeli pension system that occurred in the years 2002, 2003. But it is interesting to see how significantly a change of the amount of cases that the Israeli Supreme Court of Justice has to deal in recent years in this field. A second dimensions that I wanted to present to you today is again a very preliminary finding from a qualitative analysis. I took one case, a very well-known case, which is called the Fidelman case. The Fidelman case is the case around the rights of survivor benefits for men who are widowers, as opposed to survivor rights benefits for women who are widowers. According to Israel bylaws of the pension funds, there used to be a significant difference of the rights between men who were widowers and women who were widowers regarding their survival benefits. In general, the rule was that while women survivors received 60% or 40%, it depends, of survivor benefits of their late husband, men who were survivors of their wives who were widowed received 50% of women. So men would receive only 20% or 30% survivor pension. So they were they had only 50% of the rights of their equivalent widower who were a woman. So that case got to the Supreme Court. In reading the decision itself, the outcome is not important. It's very interesting. The Israeli Supreme Court held that the bylaw was unconstitutional, basically, that it infringed the right for equality. And prior to that, and because of that, basically today the law has changed, and widowers, men and women, received the same rights. But the text of the decision itself was interesting. First of all, it was very interesting to see in the text itself the importance that the judges give to the unique history of the Israeli pension scheme. So the court takes a lot of effort to tell us, to give us a story of the history of the Israeli pension scheme and its socialist roots, its social ideology, and it's very important for the court to give the readers this unique social background. A second very interesting theme that the court emphasizes in its decision, it's the dual legal nature of the bylaws. So the court emphasizes, and again goes to great length to emphasize that on the one hand, the legal standing or the position of the pension bylaw is on the one hand a very private law contract mechanism. But on the other hand, the Supreme Court says that it's not only a private law sphere. This contract, these bylaws, have also a public law dimension, which is very important. The third theme that the court stresses is the dynamic principle or the dynamic nature of occupational pension. The court goes against to great length to emphasize the fact that pensions are dynamic and that legal rights within occupational pension change or may change a long time. So it's not a static private law contract which ends once you sign the contract. It's a dynamic legal mechanism that may change as time changes and moving on. A very interesting theme which I related prior was this intergenerational shared responsibility element of occupational pensions. Once again, the Supreme Court stresses and emphasizes the intergenerational element and importance of occupational pensions and its importance and relevance to how one needs to construct and interpret the bylaws of the pension funds and how you should construct them. And finally, again in a very interesting theme, the way the court views its own role in society in the context of occupational pensions. The court says that it views himself as one that needs to adapt law to changes in social values. So specifically in the context of gender and equality and the roles that men and women play in society, the court says that even if in the past women and men played different roles in social life, thus extended it to their roles and place in occupational pension, it is the duty of the court today to adapt the bylaws and the legal regulation of the occupational pensions to adhere to current day social values of gender equality. So, since I don't have any findings and I don't have any empirical data to present to you, I will share with you some thoughts and invite you to give me and share with me your thoughts regarding these issues. One thing that I am thinking of doing is to try to do a typology of the cases. And my preliminary thoughts is that I think to divide all the cases into 4 main fields of types of cases. So one type of cases is cases that legally ask the constitutionality of the legal scheme surrounding the pensions in Israel. Is the scheme legal? Is the reform constitutional? That's one kind of types of cases. The second type of cases is the legal regulation of this field. There are many bylaws, many different regulations that regulate pensions in Israel, and there are many cases that challenge, again, the legality of the regulatory schemes of the pensions in Israel. The third type of cases is the interpretation, the legal constructions of the bylaws. What do they mean? How do we need to apply them? And the fourth type of cases is unique populations. We have various cases that ask questions regarding unique population, such as women versus women, widowers, as I told you in the Fidelman case, divorcees versus common law marriage, and, for example, same-sex marriage, the rights, for example, of gays and lesbians within the occupational pension systems. Finally, I would like to integrate my findings into, as I said, broader theoretical perspectives. And once again, from a very preliminary thoughts, I think that, for example, one theoretical approach would ask, to what extent does the Israeli Supreme Court views or approaches legal cases of occupational pensions in the same manner it approaches issues of social rights? Traditionally, or in many cases, the Israeli Supreme Court was very conservative when social rights were brought before him and were argued, especially when it included the financial resources from the side of the state. So to what extent will we find that in similar lines to social rights cases, the court would view itself in a conservative policy not to intervene or not to take decisions that will have a financial burden on the states? A second approach in a similar lines is, to what extent will the Supreme Court will view itself as lacking the needed expertise to dive into these financial calculation of actuarial elements, and would again withhold itself and be very conservative, saying that in general, when it comes to financial and economic policies, I am not the right institution to intervene? And finally, to what extent will the Supreme Court dive into market failures and view this field of occupational pension as a type of market failure, and will intervene to protect the rights of pensioners and older persons? So I will stop here. Thank you for your listening, and thank you.